As the gates of Auschwitz opened, a young woman stepped out to greet new prisoners with a chilling smile. Her name was Irma Grese, and she was one of the most notorious figures of the Holocaust. As she surveyed the camp, her frigid blue eyes are filled with a sense of superiority and who her next victim would be. Irma Grese was one of the few female SS officers at the Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen concentration camps, and her reign of terror was ruthless and relentless. She relished her authority over her captives, meting out punishments with shockingly sadistic glee, even by Nazi standards. Her legacy would be unfathomable horror and cruelty, and her name would live in infamy as a symbol of the Holocaust's atrocities. In this video, we will examine the life and crimes of Irma Grese, as well as the reasons why this young woman, scarcely out of her teens, became a bloodthirsty monster. We will focus on the darkest period in human history and the warped minds responsible for it. Prepare to enter a world of darkness and despair as we reveal Irma Grese's, the Hyena of Auschwitz, terrifying legacy. Irma Grese would be any psychologist's studying the effects of childhood trauma and sociopathy dream patient. Irmgard Eiler Ida Grese was born on the 7th of October 1923 in Wrechen, Mecklenburg-Strelitz, Germany, to dairy laborers Bertha and Alfred Grese. The constant conflict between her parents made their home unhealthy and oppressive for their 6 children. This tainted their childhood and may be the psychological root of Grese's promiscuity in later life. 1 month later, on November 8, 1923, a political rookie, Adolf Hitler, launched the infamous Munich Putsch, an abortive effort to start an insurrection in Germany against the Weimar Republic. Although they would never meet, Hitler's rhetoric would influence Grese's despicable behavior in the future. In 1936, her mother committed suicide by consuming hydrochloric acid after learning of Alfred's adultery with the daughter of a local tavern owner. These events would result in a history of troubled adolescent behavior and a volatile relationship with her father. Helena, one of Grese's sisters, testified at her criminal prosecution that Grese was severely bullied at school and lacked the courage to defend herself. Although this testimony today would be seen as manipulation by her sister to prove that Grese wasn't naturally violent or psychotic. At the age of 15, Grese, unable to withstand the constant bullying from fellow students, quit her schooling in 1938. She worked on a farm for 6 months, a store, and in an SS-run hospital for 2 years. Grese hoped to become a supporting nurse, so in 1939, she enrolled at the SS Convalescent Hospital in Hohenlychen, where she studied under the orthopedic surgeon Karl Gebhardt, who conducted horrific infection experiments on captives. After failing nursing school, she was appointed to work as a machine operator. Grese, like her sisters, wished to join the League of German Girls, the female branch of the Hitler Youth, but her father forbade her from doing so. The League of German Girls used campfire romanticism, summer camps, folklore, tradition, and athletics to indoctrinate girls into the Nazi belief system and to prepare them for the roles of wife, mother, and homemaker in German society. Their evenings were devoted to domestic training, while their Saturdays were filled with rigorous outdoor exercise and physical training. The aim of these activities was to improve their health and values so that they could better serve their community and nation. This instruction would include learning Nazi songs, Nazi holidays, anecdotes about Hitler Youth martyrs, and German cultural and historical facts. This was essentially a Nazi propaganda organization for future Aryan mothers. Would countless prisoners have been spared if Grese attended the League of German Girls camps, where the values of woman and motherhood were taught? We doubt this, as thousands of other women in Nazi Germany were just as willing to do Hitler's bidding of exterminating undesirables. Before her 17th birthday, she moved to the SS Female Helpers Training Base near Ravensbrück, the female-only concentration camp. She became a guard at Ravensbrück in 1940. She was ordered to report to Auschwitz-Birkenau in 1943, where she was allocated to the women's concentration camp. This is where she developed the habit of carrying a pistol and a whip braided from wire and cellophane, and donning heavy boots. By the following year, she had been promoted to the second highest rank attainable by a female SS officer and was in command of a camp holding 30,000 women. The cost of her rapid rise to power? Bodies, blood, and many sexual affairs with some of history's most villainous characters. Auschwitz-Birkenau was the site of abhorrent atrocities, such as mass extermination, flogging, beating to the point of injury or death, and cremation of Jews and other Third Reich victims. As Grese assumed office, 4 massive crematoria were nearing completion to serve the sinister plans already in place for the Holocaust's final solution. Auschwitz proved the perfect breeding ground for Grese's savagery, perverseness, and absolute lack of empathy for fellow human beings. Grese's atrocities are horrific and almost incomprehensible. She viciously struck women on the breasts and nipples, and employed Jewish girls as lookouts while she raped female captives. She would randomly kick individuals, particularly with her hobnailed jackboots, and mercilessly whip them with her custom-made whip. She would approach detainees who were starving while consuming an apple, place the apple's core into her attack dog's lap, and then leave, expecting the prisoners would try to retrieve the core and be mauled to death. Vera Alexander, a survivor, recalls her saying, "One down, it doesn't matter," after fragments of a fellow prisoner's brain landed on her shoulder after she had been strolling around, randomly shooting people. Grese purchased 2 large dogs that were trained to kill and purposefully starved them to make them aggressive and anxious to attack prisoners. Grese had a habit of selecting the most beautiful female prisoners for the gas chamber or near-death whippings out of envy and spite. Grese would often attend surgeries for whipping-related infections, most likely caused by her, seemingly relishing the screams of those who had to endure the procedures without anesthesia. She would kick the women with her boots if they did not scream loudly enough. She was rumored to experience an erotic high from seeing her victims suffer. Grese's reputation for depravity grew as she slept with countless SS officers while taking a break from torturing captives. According to reports, Grese had a voracious sexual appetite. She had sexual encounters with many male officers, including Dr. Joseph Mengele and Joseph Kramer, the commandant of Birkenau. This allowed her to choose which captives were sent to Mengele for experimentation and which were sent to the gas chamber. Grese's choice of experimental subjects most likely included children for Mengele's horrific twin experiments. Approximately 3,000 children at Auschwitz-Birkenau were subjected to disease, disfigurement, and torture under the pretense of medical research into illness, human endurance, and other issues. The program, led by physician Joseph Mengele, used twins as unwilling medical subjects. During the massive selections that took place at the camp's enormous railway platform, twins were isolated from the other captives and rushed to a laboratory for examination. Typically, Mengele used one sibling as a control and subjected the other to blood transfusions, forced insemination, disease injections, amputations, and murder. The deceased were dissected and studied, while their surviving counterparts were murdered and subjected to the same scrutiny. Mengele ended their relationship when he learned she was committing sexual assaults on female captives. When Grese grew weary of a sexual companion, She thrashed them and sentenced them to death. She would also torment and abuse any male or female prisoner who rejected her sexual advances. Grese was not the only female overseer at these camps. What was the rationale behind women becoming guards in death camps, and whose brutality sometimes even shocked the most hardened SS officers? Approximately 10% of the 37,000 SS officers who actively took part in the daily suffering, torture, and murder of those imprisoned were female supervisors. Upon entering the camps, just like their male counterparts, female guards were trained to become callous and severely discipline prisoners when necessary. Many became acclimated to striking and beating captives with their jackboots, clubs, and truncheons, sometimes to the point of death. Before becoming a guard at Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen, Elisabeth Volkenrath was an unskilled laborer. Ruth Closius, who was sentenced to death for her extreme cruelty, wanted to become a nurse, but became a saleswoman in a textile warehouse. Before entering the camps, these women were average women living ordinary lives. Many of them were not even Nazi Party members. Less than 5% of female SS guards were formal members of the Nazi Party, in contrast to the vast majority of male guards who were fervent supporters of Nazi ideology and racial beliefs. For some women, the allure of a secure, well-paying job with uniform and housing was adequate. Female guards earned approximately 185 Reichsmarks, significantly higher than the average wage of 76 Reichsmarks for women of the same age working menial factory jobs. Becoming an officer signified social mobility for some uneducated and lower-class women. Despite this, the SS could not garner enough recruits necessary to manage the growing number of female prisoners as of 1942. Instead, they were forced to rely on conscription. Even Grese claimed that she was sent to Ravensbrück by the labor exchange, where all female guards were trained, and that she had no choice in the matter. As 1944 came to a close, and it became clear that the Allies would defeat Nazi Germany, the Auschwitz commandants began destroying evidence of the atrocities committed there. Buildings were demolished, blown up, or set on fire, and records were destroyed. As the Soviet army entered Krakow in January 1945, the Nazis ordered that Auschwitz be closed. Before the end of the month, an estimated 60,000 detainees, accompanied by Nazi soldiers, were made to march 30 miles to the Polish villages of Gliwice or Wodzisław. This event became known as the Auschwitz Death March. Countless prisoners died during this march. Those who survived were transported by train to German concentration camps. Grese accompanied one of these Auschwitz to Ravensbrück prisoner evacuation transports. In March, she traveled to the Bergen-Belsen camp. Grese was eventually apprehended by the British on April 15, 1945. In the following days, she was forced to assist in the collective burial of thousands of deceased prisoners in mass graves. Grese was later transported to the Lower Saxony Penitentiary of Celle, near Lunenburg, to await her prosecution. Grese was one of 45 people accused of war crimes during the Belsen trial. The trials were conducted in accordance with British military law, with allegations based on the Geneva Convention of 1929 regarding the treatment of prisoners. The accusations against her centered on her alleged abuse and murder of detainees. Grese pleaded not guilty to the offenses she was facing. She claimed that she was simply following orders in her defense. Himmler is ultimately responsible for everything that happened, she declared. But I assume that I bear as much responsibility as my commanding officers. She vehemently refuted the accusations made against her. Looking at the prisoners, she declared that she saw nothing but Dreck, the German word for soil or mud. Grese was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to hang for her atrocities committed at Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen on November 17, 1945. The notorious Albert Pierpoint, who had already executed 400 convicted criminals at the time of the execution, was flown in from the United Kingdom. On December 12, 1945, Grese was weighed and measured so that the hangman could compute the necessary adjustments to the gallows for the execution. The following morning, at 9:34 a.m., she entered the execution chamber, looked at the officials, and then strolled to the chalk mark in the trapdoor's center. As the white cap was placed over her head, she said slowly, "Schnell," which translates to quickly. The trapdoor opened underneath Grese's feet. The physician entered the pit underneath the gallows and pronounced that the Hyena of Auschwitz was dead. After 20 minutes, the body was removed and deposited in a coffin for burial. Even in a time when evil was normal, Irma Grese will go down in history as one of the evilest women ever to live. Many of the women who perpetrated atrocities in the camps were never prosecuted and were able to get back to their everyday lives that they had before the war. Almost 80 years after the liberation of the concentration camps, it is crucial to remember that women were not only victims, mothers, and wives, but also active agents in perpetrating the terrors endured by millions of people during the Holocaust.